Now, pay attention, please.
3 movies in, and this is the movie that would become the template for almost all James Bond films to follow. This was the film that moved away from strict adaptations of Ian Fleming's books, allowing the filmmakers to carve their own path forward. James Bond, 007, licensed to kill, a man wearing a very short terry-toweling jumpsuit with a seagull on his head.
Let's have a little fun with Mr. Goldfinger.
Decades later, this is the definitive James Bond film. And this time we mean it for realsies. No takebacks, Goldfinger.
Operation Grand Slam will be successful. You will be there to see for yourself. Too close for comfort, I'm afraid.
The first James Bond film did well. The second James Bond film did even better. So hopes were high for a third film to do better again. Goldfinger, released in 1964, was where Bond went from being a popular thriller series to a decade-defining franchise. If you surveyed a group of people to name 10 things from the 60s, you'd surely get Goldfinger name-checked in a large number of your responses. Unless, of course, you asked people from the 60s, since apparently if you remember the 60s then you weren't there. Fortunately, for those with historical substance use or cognitive decline, or perhaps they hadn't yet been born, this film has been preserved for every generation to enjoy.
What do you know about gold?
Producers Albert R. Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman took Fleming's 1959 novel, threw writers Richard Maybaum and Paul Dane at it, and hired new-to-Bond director Guy Hamilton to put it all together.
Shocking.
Goldfinger started off as a hit, but by virtue of having done everything so well, it instantly made it harder for subsequent James Bond films to live up to this film's reputation. Just as Auntie Beryl's daughter Meryl has yet to break her mum's beer drinking record on a flight from Sydney to London. Goldfinger is where James Bond films went from being stylish thrillers to a little silly and slight, where realistic thrills took a backseat to gimmicks, one-liners, and cars that were actively hostile to passengers. Goldfinger the movie is based on Goldfinger the book, and like Goldfinger the book, Goldfinger the movie is about a plot by Goldfinger the man. Goldfinger the man, the book and the movie, is all about the lust for gold, so it's not an ironic title by any stretch of the imagination. Auric Goldfinger is up to no good. He's possibly smuggling gold, and Bond is assigned to investigate. Goldfinger is assisted by his henchman Oddjob, a mute chauffeur and millenary murderer. Oddjob would become the archetype for all of the best henchmen, physically stronger than Bond, with a unique twist. In this case, he throws a hat, like Super Mario, except here, Oddjob decapitates statues. Lousy statues had it coming. Well, anyway, as we said, Goldfinger is a gold fetishist, which makes having a name like Goldfinger that bit more disturbing. One of his associates...
My name is Pussy Galore.
I must be dreaming.
Goldfinger has a plot to enter the US gold depository at Fort Knox with the help of some gangsters who smuggled in bits and bobs used to build a small atomic device.
It's small, but particularly dirty.
Goldfinger details his plans, but not with something as mundane as a PowerPoint. Goldfinger's keynote speech has special lighting, massive models on hydraulic lifts, and a practiced sales pitch.
Larger, better protected perhaps, but nonetheless, a bang!
And his version of one more thing is that he just ups and kills everyone anyway. That's what happens when a dress rehearsal kills. So by now you can see logic has well and truly left the building in favour of crowd-pleasing set pieces. And I am not complaining for 1 second. Goldfinger is one hell of an entertaining film, untainted by the fact that Bond producers would return to the same well again and again. Just like how a young Bruce Wayne keeps pestering his parents about going to the theatre.
Why does he do it?
He likes to win.
Goldfinger has its tongue planted firmly in its cheek, which is to say that it doesn't take itself too seriously at all. But it also lets the audience in on the joke.
That's as bad as listening to the Beatles without earmuffs.
Bond has a few small gadgets, but of course the most famous is Bond's new car, the now iconic Aston Martin DB5, with revolving license plates, machine gun, and of course a premium sunroof option. The smoke, by the way, isn't a gadget. Bond wrecked the exhaust by going too fast over a speed bump. The Aston Martin was so iconic that decades later, whenever the series wanted to remind you of Sean Connery and Bond at its peak, they would trot out the DB5. The DB5 as a piece of hardware that's become closely associated with the James Bond series, where if there's a type of toy, then there's probably a DB5 James Bond tie-in. Who knew that painting a naked actress in gold paint would make for such indelible and iconic imagery? Even the exotic locations have to take a backseat to murder here. Switzerland looks beautiful, but it's barely in the film. And then they go to Kentucky, where they film in, junkyards, and a luxurious Kentucky Fried Chicken and the like. They film at a golf club not far from Pinewood Studios, and most of Fort Knox's exterior is mostly represented by a set built at Pinewood. A game of golf gives Connery the chance to show Bond at his most playful, sparring with Goldfinger, but so civilly you'd think that the worst thing that had happened between them was when Goldfinger ate the last hobnob in the break room. John Barry was now firmly entrenched as the default composer on Bond films, with Goldfinger being some of his best work. It's big and it's bold, with more brass than a trombone manufacturer that's just completed a merger with a trumpet maker, which of course hasn't yet followed through on plans to close down the now redundant flugelhorn division. Goldfinger, of course, has the song sung by Shirley Bassey, which again is the gold standard by which all other Bond themes are measured. Or weighed. Gold standard, get it? Gold standard, because the song is now a standard. It's about a guy who gets aroused by gold. Anyway, the last note is killer. Goldfinger is Sean Connery's best performance as James Bond. He had the role down pat, and this is where Connery was still charming and a little vulnerable, especially in the famous scene where Goldfinger was going to carve up Bond with a laser.
Do you expect me to talk?
No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die.
After this, his performances as Bond would be a mixture of boredom, smugness, or condescension, which, funnily enough, was what most reviewers said about my self-help book, Pull Your Finger Out, You Dumb Dum-Dums.
And incidentally, we'd appreciate its return, intact for once, when you return from the field.
Oh, you'd be surprised the amount of wear and tear that goes on out there in the field.
M is back, as is Miss Moneypenny. But the director suggested a pretty important change to Q, instructing Desmond Llewellyn to be slightly frustrated in dealing with Bond, something that would make every subsequent scene with Q the highlight of even the dullest Bond movie. Goldfinger starts a new tradition of recasting Felix Leiter in almost every movie. Here he's slightly older, played by Cease Lender, where his main trait seems to be a frustrated admiration for Bond. It's almost as if the camera cuts away from him just as he's about to say, "What a guy."
I told the stewardess, liquor for 3.
Who are the other two?
Oh, there are no other 2.
Of course, it's not a Bond film without the girls. One gets killed by being painted head to toe with gold paint, and another is mistaken for a garden statue by Oddjob. I've never really understood what the big deal about being painted head to toe was. I mean, I'm painted gold right now. It's a rather pleasant sensation on a warm day. Just don't lean on a freshly painted wall.
And Pussy?
The third Bond woman is Pussy Galore.
Pussy.
You say it now and it has no meaning, but people were embarrassed by the character's name in the 60s, particularly American interviewers.
Isn't it customary to grant a condemned man his last request?
You've asked for this.
Honor Blackman had made a splash on British television in The Avengers. The early seasons of that stylish spy series were made in a multi-camera television studio, recorded almost as if they were live. Honor Blackman's character, Cathy Gale, was one of the first ass-kicking women on British television, where in the live studio she would use judo moves to throw stuntmen onto concrete floors.
I'm completely defenseless.
Honor Blackman was a natural for a Bond woman, someone who could hold her own. She was also a couple of years older than Connery at the time, something that wouldn't happen again in a Bond film for about 50 years.
You can turn off the charm. I'm immune.
Pussy Galore in the book was a lesbian who was turned around by Bond's seductive charm.
You're a woman of many parts, Pussy.
Here her sexuality is more implied, but Bond not winning over the Bond woman was not going to fly in the 1960s. Also not flying much in the 1960s, Spitfires, the Hindenburg and the Big Bopper.
Pussy.
Pussy Galore is possibly my favourite 1960s Bond woman due to Honor Blackman's assured performance. Acting ability wasn't always taken into consideration when casting the female lead in a Bond film, but in this case they got it absolutely right. Pussy Galore is no damsel in distress, and indeed she does seem quite okay with going along with Goldfinger's murderous plan right up until the end, where she alerts Leiter to the Fort Knox plane.
Come again.
A lot of vagina.
Harold Sakata was a wrestler and an Olympian, and he's menacing as the silent killer Oddjob. Sakata makes such an impact in this film that his image is the first thing that pops into your mind when you think of a Bond villain's henchman.
This is gold, Mr. Bond. All my life I've been in love with its color. I welcome any enterprise that will increase my stock.
Goldfinger, too, is just pitch perfect, and as we'd see in subsequent films, what a difference a strong and interesting villain makes over somebody more perfunctory. German actor Gert Frobe spoke about as much intelligible English as I speak intelligible English. He was coached to speak his lines phonetically and then told to reel them off as quickly as possible. He was of course dubbed, still with an accent despite the fact Goldfinger is meant to be English. Of course, almost every Bond villain and Bond woman in the 60s, particularly if they weren't either English or American, were dubbed by other actors. It was actually quite common in most movies of the day. Happens all the time. I'm being dubbed by another actor right now. Guy Hamilton came in to direct Goldfinger, and what a difference a director makes. The filmmaking in Goldfinger is slightly tighter, and even the silly stuff sort of works now. Why does Goldfinger install an elaborate system for briefing people he's already planned to kill? Because it makes for a great scene. Why does the gangster Solo, having already been paid in gold, get shot and then is left in a car that's about to be crushed? It's so Goldfinger can say this line.
Forgive me, Mr. Bond, but I must arrange to separate my gold from the late Mr. Solo.
And I really don't want to know where Bond has hidden his gold bar.
It's worth £5,000.
Guy Hamilton would return for 3 more Bond films in the early 70s, none of which would quite match Goldfinger for the perfect blend of action and humour. With Goldfinger, the Bond films traded a stylized realism for an almost fantasy setting. In Ian Fleming's book, Goldfinger's plan was to steal the gold with little regard for the practicalities of moving so much heavy metal without an army of roadies wearing Metallica t-shirts.
60 men would take 12 days to load it onto 200 trucks.
Who mentioned anything about removing it?
So instead we get Goldfinger irradiating US gold supply to increase the value of his own gold. But if Goldfinger had been successful, it wouldn't have been all that bad, because Uncle Darren's teeth would have been worth a fortune had he not hocked them to buy a snowmobile. How's Shirley going? Goldfinger is the film that has informed many people's idea of a typical James Bond movie. Outlandish villain with an equally outlandish plot, a cool henchman, gadgets, girls, Bond being a general know-all and show-off,
With an overdose of bonbon.
and of course a brassy soundtrack with a major contemporary recording artist singing a title song. It's also been parodied into infinity by every other spy film.
Who throws a shoe?
It's easily the greatest Bond film of the 60s, and the one that they always come back to when the series needs a pick-me-up. And that's for a damn good reason. It's great. Gold is really very heavy. In the film, production designer Ken Adams' massive set was conjured out of thin air since permission to scout inside Fort Knox depository was denied. Adam has gold stacked to the roof, when in reality, because gold is really very heavy, depending on the surface your gold storage facility is built on and the engineering of the basic slab and foundations, etc., you can't really stack gold all that high. Of course, somebody had to learn this the hard way. And while, in probably made-up facts, the Fort Knox Gold Depository was not initially designed with a basement, it sure as shit has one now.
Brilliant.
Of course, in real life, the US stores its gold in a couple of vaults around the country, with a little fun money stashed in a sock by a treasury official. So if you see a dude in a cheap suit in Las Vegas casinos who seems to be favouring one leg, hey, don't be a stranger. Fort Knox for a long time was a byword for an impregnable vault surrounded by thousands of troops. My own personal gold storage facility is somewhat more modest. It's a Christmas-themed tin that once had candies in it, and truth be told doesn't store all that much gold. Actually doesn't have any gold. But it's usually got some rubber bands, a 16 megabyte USB flash drive, some lint, a pencil sharpener, some pencil shavings, and some loose mints. But mint finger doesn't sound all that cool.
Do you have access to more?
Yes, from the same source.
The first Bond film in 1962 cost $1 million. The follow-up came in at around $2 million. Goldfinger was budgeted at a then sizable $3 million. By using these figures and poorly extrapolating these numbers, we can inaccurately project that the 30th James Bond film would need a $30 million budget. Now that is outrageous. Also, I should really stop trying to work out multiplication using only my fingers. Wow, bravo Shirley, have a lemsip. Goldfinger, again being such a smash, meant that another Bond film was going to be released a year later. That sounds great, until you realise it's Thunderball.
He's quite mad, you know.
If you enjoyed this review, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below or check out some of our other videos.